Hi there, Paul. A long time ago, a girl named Natsai preened herself over a mirror in the late afternoon when her youngest cousin Musa ran into her hut, frantic and breathless. Sissy Natsai, the young girl was saying, clawing at her arm. There is somebody by the entrance to the village who wants to see you. They said they have a message from father. Hurry. Natsai dropped her comb, gathered her skirts and rushed towards the village gate, her heart in her hands. Her father had been gone on merchant business for 2 weeks now and had not sent word as to whether he was well or not. Whenever he had stayed away for longer than usual, he had always made Natsai aware, through a messenger, that he had been held up. Being her only surviving parent and being the only child and heiress, Natsai had never wanted to imagine what would happen to her should he never come back. And now, as she rushed towards the gate, she could only hope that he was doing well, and it was a messenger who wanted to tell her father had been held up and he would be coming back soon. But when she got to the gate, there was no one. She stood for a moment, confused. Had Musa been saying something else? But the girl's words had been clear. There was someone by the entrance who had come to see her. Glancing furtively back to see if someone was watching her and finding no one, Natsai took a step outside into the forest. She knew it was forbidden in the village for women to wander into the forest alone, for there were jackals and foxes and hyenas and men all looking for game. And yet she just wanted to check. She had not taken more than 3 steps into the forest when she heard a rustle of leaves to her side. But before she could even look up to check on the rustle, a roughly hewn cotton bag had been thrown over her face, and someone was trying to tie her 2 hands that were trying to fight. She tried to scream, but the bag over her head was muffling the sounds, and before long, she felt her body being lifted off the ground and being hoisted by 4 hands before she felt the carriers trekking with her across the forest. Even as they carried her, her mind was whirling. Who were those men? What did they want from her? Where was her father? Had they taken him too? But there was no one to ask those questions as her mouth was covered. The journey to wherever they were going was long, and Natsai was growing more and more frantic the further she was taken away from home. How will anyone know where I have gone? She thought to herself. How would anyone know how to find her? What if she was never found and these people, whoever they were, took her life and fed her off to the wild animals? Her body alternated between sweat and shivers of fear, while her heart beat to the pulse of a drunk drummer. The men had made her powerless, and she didn't know how to fight back, and that scared her even worse. It was sunset when they finally arrived, and she knew from the cicadas that were creaking happily away that the sun was starting to set. The 2 carriers set her body down on the ground and walked a few steps away where they had a muted conversation. She could also hear the sounds of humanity close by, a clanging pot, some female laughter, the coo of a baby. Hearing feminine sounds around made her breathe easier. At least she was not alone. Then she heard footsteps approach and a hoarse voice say, "Take the cloth off." It took a while before Natsai could take in the view before her. She could tell they were not in a village, as there was a canopy of trees all around her, but it was a clearing, and several tents had lights flickering in them. She saw men and women and children sitting around fires. She saw donkeys tethered to trees braying to each other, and she realized where she was, inside a nomadic camp. She took her time before turning to look at the hoarse-voiced man who had given the command, and when she eventually raised her eyes to him, she did a double take. It was the face of a handsome young man, not much older than her, but holding so much authority in his face and in his sitting posture that she knew he was the leader of the nomadic tribe. A smile sat easily on his lips, but it did not translate to his eyes, which were cold and were studying the girl calculatively. Natsai squirmed in her seat by the forest floor. 1,000 questions raced through her mind, but what came out of her mouth was, "Take these ropes off my hands," as she thrust her hands to the man. But the handsome young man laughed so hard as if it were a joke before saying, "For someone who is a captive, you have some nerve giving us a command." Then he turned to the two men who stood beside him and said to them, "The girl must have had a rough afternoon. Bring her some food and water." But Natsai refused to take a morsel and a sip, turning to the commander again. "Who are you? Why have you captured me, you renegades? Women kidnappers, you cowards, coming here and looking all fierce, pretending like you are some warriors in a war. Why did you take me, brave ones, when you could have displayed your bravery by capturing a man? Huh?" The commander laughed, then stood. "Well, I was trying to be hospitable and offer you something to eat, but it seems that you are okay, and I will leave you to it. See you in the morning." He turned to the muscular man. "Do not untie her. Tie the legs and take her to the tent we prepared for her." Then he started to walk off. "Wait," Natsai called out. "Wait." And the young commander stopped in his tracks but did not turn his face to her. "Take me home, please," Natsai pleaded. "My father is very wealthy. If you release me and take me back home, I will convince him to give you so much livestock that you will become wealthy. Only if..." But the commander had turned and was looking at her again, a coldness emitting from his face that Natsai shivered despite the warmth of the summer. "Your father?" The commander spat, then scoffed. "Your father?" Then he shook his head and walked away into the forest and disappeared into the setting sun. That night in the tent, Natsai did not sleep well. She had never slept on the ground before, and her bed back home was adorned with the richest skins and clothes that her father brought from his merchant trips abroad. But now she lay on a reed mat, placed directly on the ground, with nothing to protect her bones from hitting the ground. The ropes tying her wrists and her ankles were chafing her, and she found it difficult to turn, such that the entire night she was curled like a ball on the ground. She tried so hard not to think. There was nothing that thinking would change for her. At least she was still alive, which meant she had another chance to beg for clemency. In his tent too, Muedzo did not sleep. He was pacing the length and breadth of the accommodation, deep in thought. A part of him was cursing himself. He had known that the merchant had a child, his only heir, and he had thought that the child was a boy, because why would anyone make a girl an heir, especially to the vast wealth that the merchant had amassed? And so when the guards had brought back a girl, he had been shocked. His first instinct had been to return the girl, but he knew that the Toro tribe was looking up to him for a solution that would allow them to regain their land and their trade routes. If he returned the girl, then they would all lose trust in him and his leadership, so he knew he had to keep the girl. He had not expected to find the girl attractive, and when the bag had been wrenched off her face, he had been mesmerized by her beauty, and involuntarily his loins had stirred. And now in his tent, all you could see were her big round eyes that sat in flawless melanin skin, and the dimples in her cheeks, and the voice that sounded like a musician's instrument. He tried not to examine the feelings in his heart, because he remembered how once, when he was still a teenager, he had fallen for a childhood friend, but she had jilted him and fallen for another instead, and he had cried while his friends laughed raucously at him. He had vowed then never to look at a girl, but to see all girls as his sisters, his kin. For Natsai, however, sometime in the night she fell asleep, because the next time she opened her eyes, a young woman, almost her age, was peering down at her. It took a moment for Natsai to realize where she was, and when she did, she was jolted back to reality, and she felt a sting from the chafed flesh on her wrists and ankles. "I have come to help you with your ablutions," the young woman said, helping Natsai up and with a towel, gently patting the dirt away from her skin and giving Natsai privacy when she wanted to relieve herself. The young woman said not another word, and she did not respond to any of Natsai's questions as to where she was or why she had been captured. By the time the bath was over, Natsai was so frustrated that she refused the fruitage she was offered, and the young woman left. Natsai did not see anyone else that day, although the sounds of the camp continued to infiltrate her ears. By the time the commander came to see her that night, she was at her wit's end. The young man arrived and sat on a stool in the tent facing Natsai. In his hands, he was peeling a huge mango with a pocket knife and sliding slices into his mouth while watching the young woman before him. Then silently he offered her a piece, and hungrily she opened her mouth, where he slid in a piece. He fed her quietly until he held only the piece. Then she asked him, "Why am I here?" "You are collateral for a debt owed," he responded. "Who owes you?" she asked. "My father?" She saw him flinch when she said the word father, but she continued anyway. "He can repay you whatever is owed," she promised. "Please, return me home." He didn't respond. He did not respond when she asked who they were or what they intended to do with her, or if one day she would return to her home. Instead, he looked at her the whole time, an inscrutable expression on his face. Then after a while, he rose and said, "Tendai will bring you something to eat," before striding towards the tent's door. "Untie me at least," she called out to his back, but he did not stop, stooping over the open flaps and disappearing into the setting sun. But even Tendai, who had helped her with bathing in the morning and who brought her a delicious meal, did not have answers to the multitude of questions Natsai asked. It became his routine, visiting her at sunset, bringing a fruit which he fed her and not answering any question that she asked. On the fifth day, Natsai was tired of asking questions, so she watched him sit there, saying nothing, and the two of them had a staring competition until the young commander laughed and excused himself. The next day, Natsai asked him, "What is your name?" "Muedzo," he responded. Natsai was tempted again to ask what he wanted from her, but eventually refrained, instead saying, "Please untie me. My back is aching from the improper sleeping positions. It's not as if I know where I am and how to get back home. I promise I will behave." Muedzo laughed but untied her hands anyway. "Know that you will have a guard stationed by your door all day and all night long, and if you try to escape, the robs will come back on." But Natsai had tried anyway, peeping outside the tent at night and finding two muscular men sitting by the entrance to the tent, their spears and clubs resting by their knees. When next Muedzo visited, Natsai had another request. "I need fresh air. Please allow me to go out of the tent. Tendai and the guards can accompany me around. I can't afford to be cooped up in here." So again Muedzo had allowed her more room around the camp. But once outside the tent, as she walked around the camp, Natsai felt the hostility that came towards her in waves. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stood to watch her, offering neither smile nor greeting for the greetings she gave them. "Take me back to the tent," she whispered to Tendai. "Now." Once safe in the sanctuary of her tent, she had tried to ask Tendai why people seemed to hate her so, but Tendai had not replied. When Muedzo had come to visit her, he said in response to her question, "Because you are rich, you are spoiled, and you carry yourself in a way that makes others feel inferior." "But they don't know me," she said. "How then can they know I am spoiled?" Muedzo lifted his eyebrows. "They don't know you?" Natsai sighed exasperatedly. "Why am I here?" she asked. And she knew even as the words flowed out of her mouth that she would not get an answer from him. She had been in the camp for 2 months now, and still she did not know why she had been captured. She was no slave, as no one had ever subjected her to slave labor. It was not Msengabere, as no man had captured her and married her forcefully. It was not for war reasons, for this seemed to be a normal camp with women and children whom she was sure would not fight back. So why was she here and not at her home with her father? Oh, how she missed him. She wondered what had happened to him when he had returned from his trade trip and had not found her home. Was he looking for her? What was his state of mind? Was he eating? Bathing? Talking to anyone? And as she thought these thoughts, unbidden, tears began to flow out of her eyes, and as she tried to stem their flow and brush them away, more and more tears fell down your cheeks, as if a pool had formed in your eyes. Muedzo remembered the time he had cried while everyone laughed at him, and instinctively, without thinking, he reached for the young woman, holding her as sobs wrecked her body, rubbing her back as she hiccuped from grief, and wiping the never-ending pool of tears off her face. He rocked her until she was spent from her grief, and she sat silently in his embrace. He had not willed it to happen, but as they sat there, he breathed in the scent of her, washed her, and felt his body respond to her presence. He tried to extricate himself, but she turned to look up at him, and their eyes locked in their own embrace. Without thinking, he leaned down, and his lips brushed her forehead, and as realization hit, he sprang up, muttered a hasty good night, and sped out. But the warmth of his embrace and the tenderness of his lips was what carried Natsai throughout the night. She felt guilty about thinking about it when she could have been thinking about her father, but she had never felt anything for the boys in her village, instead choosing to daydream of the man she wanted to marry. Now she wasn't sure if the daydream was coming true. When Muedzo had returned the following day and the days after, he had not been his usual stoic and aloof self, instead sitting beside Natsai, holding her hand tentatively at first, then with boldness as the days went by, and embracing her like a brother at first, but like a lover in the days that ensued. In the moments that they were together, Natsai forgot to ask him why she was in a camp and not in her home, and when she would be reunited with her father. She allowed herself instead to revel in the moments she spent with him, and only later, when she was alone, remembering that she was in captivity. One morning, in the 3rd month of captivity, Natsai decided to do her ablutions in the forest nearby. She had no sooner than squatted when she heard 3 men discussing amongst themselves as they walked past. "He is stubborn," one voice was saying. "He should have taken the father, not the daughter. Now look, the father is not swallowing the bait, and we are stuck with a spoiled girl who does not help the other women with the chores, but spends her days sleeping, finishing our meager food stocks. The girl continues to leech off us," another man said. "First your father and the trade routes, now finishing our supplies for nothing." "He should mobilize the army," a third voice said. "We raid the village. I heard the merchant returned and is not left since the daughter's disappearance. We capture him instead, and we..." The voice was drowned as the men walked further on. Natsai's urge to relieve herself vanished, and she remained squatted, her mind reeling. When finally she had begun to feel cramps, she had raised herself and walked slowly to her tent, ignoring the looks of hostility the rest of the camp threw her way. When Muedzo came later in the day, as he always did, it was to find an enraged Natsai who almost pounced on him, but he had quickly grabbed her arms and held them in his. "What issue do you have with my father?" Natsai said, her voice cracking through the sobs wrecking her body. "Why am I here? Tell me." Muedzo let her spend her energies, and when she calmed down and was coherent, he said, "Let's sit, and I will tell you everything." They were sitting when Muedzo said, "Your father double-crossed us. He reneged on an agreement that is centuries old. He has impoverished us and our people, and we wanted to revenge him by taking you. I apologize you have been dragged into it, but your luxury has come at the expense of our suffering." Natsai was quiet for a while, then she said, "What agreement was this about?" Muedzo sighed, then said, "Our village is close to the great river, and before your father destroyed us with his unfairness, we were the ones who traded directly with the foreigners. Then we would trade with the mainlanders, including your father. This meant that we profited from the relationship between the foreigners and the mainlanders, and our land flourished. However, one day your father decided to step over the invisible barrier that we had created, and you began communicating directly with the foreigners and reducing the pricing of goods and services so that the foreigners began to forgo us and trade with him directly. We could no longer make any profit, and because we were not farmers or gatherers or hunters, we began to suffer. We reached out to your father and his team, but he did not answer, continuing to exploit us and our resources. When our voices grew louder, your father hired an army and it caught us unawares. So they decimated us, and only a few of us survived, and we have lived in the forest for 2 years and we can't go home. Taking you was a sign to your father that we need to talk, and we did it thinking your father would negotiate with us quickly. We know we can't afford to go to war with him. He can buy soldiers, we can't, and we know for certain that in any war we will lose. It's been 4 months since we took you, and still he is yet to act. I am sorry that you became a victim in all this. We just wanted our land back and we needed to do something. Both Natsai and Muedzo fell silent, contemplating. The information was too much for Natsai and she didn't know how to react. She now knew why everyone in the camp hated her so much. But she also did not want to believe that her father was the villain. She shook her head, trying to disentangle the cobwebs in her head. But Muedzo was sighing. He turned to look at Natsai and took her hands and knees. What's making matters worse is that I have fallen for you. He was looking directly into her eyes. I think I love you, Natsai. Natsai was looking at him, thoughts whirling in her mind. It was on the tip of your tongue to say, I love you too. Let me help you renegotiate with my father, when a loud, blood-curdling scream rent the air and someone shouted, They are coming! They are almost here! It did not take Muedzo a split second to rush out of the tent, and she heard him shouting, authority in his voice. Everyone too weak to fight. Grab the children and retreat now. Women and men who can fight. Let your weapons be ready. As he spoke, the sound of wolves grew nearer, then halted. Then Natsai heard her father's voice call out, Give me my daughter, or else there will be an outflow of blood here. Natsai rushed out of her tent and saw the two armies standing face to face, weaponry drawn. Muedzo shouted, Go back! Just at the same time as her father shouted, My daughter, come back home. Natsai stood momentarily struck, knowing that whatever side she chose, there would be war. So she walked in the pathway between the two armies and shouted, Put your weapons down, all of you! No one moved and she sighed. Then she turned to her father. Baba, she said in a smaller voice, you have shown me love all my life, and I need that love now. Please put your weapons down. For a moment the father was quiet. Then he lowered his hand holding a spear, signaling the others to follow suit. Natsai looked over at Muedzo. You too, she said. Please drop your weapons, and they did too. She turned back to her father. Baba, she said, you know I love you, and I'm grateful for all that you have done for me, giving me a life of luxury, a life that many people can dream of. But Baba, what then is the point in me living in luxury when there is a child growing up in this forest with no home because you invaded their land? Of what use is my luxurious upbringing when there are people here who are subjected to poverty? Baba, please give the Tsuros their land and their right as first merchants. That's how you could see her father thinking, contemplating the choices that lay before him. But she also saw the determined resolve in his face that he had always had when he had told her he loved her and wanted to give her all he could so that she would not feel her mother's absence. So she carefully added, Baba, if you cannot give them back their lands, then I am afraid I shall not return home with you. I will stay here with the Tsuros. Natsai's father's face fell, and suddenly he looked old and tired. Then in a soft voice, he said, I don't want to lose you, Manango. You are my world. I vowed to your mother that I would always take care of you, and I don't want to renege on that promise. Then he sighed and continued, It is okay. They can take back their treaties, but only if they give me back my daughter. And also if I can be a merchant in their land. Natsai turned to Muedzo, who turned to his people. There were visible signs of relief on their faces. So Muedzo said, Yes, but if you promise not to bring an army into our territory again, Otherwise, we will renege on this treaty, and we promise that the punishment that will meet on you will be harsher than this one." The old man nodded, and Natsai rushed to hug him. Muedzo invited their army for a meal. "It is too late to travel back tonight. Stay the night." The people of Tsuro were, however, waiting for Natsai, and as the two opposing camps met and shook their heads, they hoisted Natsai up in celebration. "Thank you for talking to your father," they said. "There is no way we could have fought with him. Our trusted soldiers also succumbed to the first army. We are grateful for you." That night, in a tent, Natsai had a visitor. It was Muedzo. The two lovers hugged for the longest time before sitting on the reed mat facing each other. "Thank you," Muedzo said. "We would have perished had it not been for you." Natsai looked at him shyly. "I did all that because I love you," she said. "I care for you." He smiled, then said, "I thought you'd never say." Then smiling wider, he said, "I love you even more." He sighed and added, "Do you think your father will agree if I ask for your hand in marriage?" She smiled too. "He never says no to me. You can talk to him tomorrow." And the lovers hugged again. The end. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if you liked or didn't like the story in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Bye.